I used to believe that memories faded with time, that if enough years passed, the faces would blur, the voices would disappear, and the places that once meant everything would become nothing more than names on an old map. I was wrong. Sometimes all it takes is unlocking the front door of the house where you grew up. The realtor handed me the keys with a polite smile and reminded me that the paperwork would be ready by the end of the week. She talked about property values, repairs, and how quickly the house would probably sell. I barely listened. The moment the door creaked open, 20 years disappeared. The hallway was smaller than I remembered. The wallpaper had faded. The wooden floor still groaned beneath every step. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different without the people who had filled the silence with laughter. My mother used to sing while making breakfast. My father whistled every Sunday morning as he watered the flowers on the porch. Now the only sound was the wind slipping through a window that no longer closed properly. I walked from room to room without touching anything. The living room, the kitchen, the staircase where I had once fallen and broken my wrist. Every corner carried a memory I thought I had forgotten. I kept telling myself I was only here to empty the house, pack the boxes, sign the papers, leave. That was the plan. Then I opened the door to my old bedroom. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The shelves were still covered with books I had promised myself I would read again someday. My baseball glove rested exactly where I had left it after my final high school game. A cracked guitar leaned against the wall. I smiled without realizing it. I never learned more than 3 songs. As I knelt beside the closet to pull out an old suitcase, something slid from the top shelf and landed softly on the floor. A cardboard box. Plain. Faded. Almost forgotten. My name was written across the lid in handwriting I recognized immediately. Not my parents'. Hers. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. I hadn't seen her handwriting in 15 years. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of little pieces of a life that no longer existed. Movie tickets. A dried white daisy pressed between 2 notebook pages. A photograph of 4 teenagers sitting on the hood of an old pickup truck, laughing at something no one would ever remember again. A blue friendship bracelet. The string had faded almost gray. I turned it over in my hand. She had tied it around my wrist on the last day of school before summer break. "Don't lose it," she had said with a smile. I promised I wouldn't. Life has a strange way of breaking promises for us. At the bottom of the box lay a stack of envelopes tied together with a pale blue ribbon. None of them had stamps. None had ever been mailed. The top envelope simply read my name. Ethan. My heart began to race. I hadn't heard anyone call me by that name in years. Everyone at work called me Mr. Carter. My friends called me E. Only one person had ever said Ethan as though it were the most important word in the world. I stared at the envelope for what felt like forever before finally opening it. The paper had yellowed with age. The ink had faded slightly, but every letter was still perfectly clear. If you're reading this, then you finally came home. I smiled despite myself. She always knew me better than I knew myself. Outside, rain began tapping against the roof. The same gentle rhythm that had filled so many afternoons when we were 16. Back then, we believed our town was too small for our dreams. We promised we would leave together. We promised distance would never change us. We promised that no matter where life carried us, we would always find our way back. Some promises survive. Others become memories. I unfolded the second page. Halfway through the first sentence, something slipped from between the papers and floated onto the wooden floor. It was an old Polaroid. I picked it up carefully. The picture showed two teenagers standing beneath the giant maple tree behind the school. She was looking at the camera. I was looking at her. Neither of us realized someone had captured the exact moment everything had quietly begun. I couldn't remember who had taken the photograph. Back then, someone always had a camera. Birthdays, football games, lazy afternoons by the river, long walks through town. We believed every moment deserved to be captured because we thought we had an endless supply of them. The picture had faded around the edges, but one thing remained perfectly clear. The way I looked at her. I wasn't smiling for the camera. I was smiling because she was standing beside me. Funny how everyone else noticed before we did. I turned the photograph over. In tiny blue handwriting, barely visible after all these years, were 6 simple words. The beginning of everything. Summer, 2009. A laugh escaped before I could stop it. She always wrote on the backs of photographs. Every single one. She said memories deserved captions because one day we'd forget the little details. She was wrong about that. The details were all I remembered. The way she tucked her hair behind one ear whenever she was nervous. The tiny freckle beneath her left eye. The vanilla perfume she wore because she said flowers smelled happier than expensive brands. The way she laughed without trying to hide it. Some people leave your life. Others never really leave your heart. I unfolded the letter again. If you've opened this box, then you stayed away longer than I hoped. I smiled sadly. She knew I would run. Not from her. From this town. From every dream that had once felt too small. You always believed the world was waiting somewhere else. Maybe it was. But I hope one day you realize that leaving a place isn't the same as leaving the people who loved you. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Drops rolled down the bedroom window, exactly as they had every autumn when we were teenagers. Without thinking, I looked toward the maple tree in the backyard. It was still there. Taller now. Its branches reached almost to my old bedroom window. Every October, the leaves turned bright gold before covering the grass like a blanket. She loved that tree. She once told me that if trees could remember every conversation beneath their branches, ours would probably spend all winter laughing. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Beneath it rested another. Then another. Dozens of them. Each one carried a different date. None had ever been opened. I reached for the oldest. June 18th, 2009. The day after graduation. My fingers hesitated. Reading those words felt strangely frightening. Not because I was afraid of what she had written, because I wasn't the same person who had failed to read them 15 years ago. I opened the envelope slowly. Dear Ethan, today you spent almost an hour pretending you weren't crying after the graduation ceremony. You kept saying something had gotten into your eyes. I didn't tell you that everyone knew the truth, especially me. The words blurred for a moment. I blinked hard. I could see us again. Caps and gowns, parents taking photographs, friends promising to stay in touch forever, teenagers believing forever was an actual place. She continued, "You looked terrified today. Not because we were leaving school, because growing up suddenly became real. I wanted to tell you that I was scared too. Instead, I smiled. I always smile when I'm afraid. Remember that. Maybe one day you'll understand." I stopped reading. I did understand. I just hadn't back then. A floorboard creaked somewhere downstairs. The old house settling for the night. Or maybe reminding me that I wasn't 16 anymore. I placed the letter beside the photograph and reached into the box once more. At the very bottom, beneath every envelope, lay something wrapped in a soft blue scarf. I recognized the scarf immediately. It had belonged to her. Carefully, I unfolded the fabric. Inside was a small silver key attached to a wooden tag. Only 3 words were carved into the wood. "For our place." I stared at the key, trying to remember. Then it hit me all at once. The old lakeside boathouse. The place where we had hidden everything that felt too important to leave behind. The place we promised no one else would ever find. The place I hadn't thought about until now. The boathouse stood at the far end of the lake, hidden behind a curtain of tall reeds and old willow trees. We had discovered it one summer afternoon after following a narrow path that wasn't marked on any map. The roof leaked whenever it rained, the paint had long since peeled away, and one of the windows was cracked. But to us, it felt like a place the world had forgotten. I slipped the small silver key into my pocket and left the house before I could change my mind. The air smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves. Every step toward the lake felt strangely familiar, as though my feet still remembered a path my heart had spent years trying to erase. When the boathouse finally came into view, it looked smaller than I remembered. The old padlock still hung on the weathered door. My hands trembled as I reached for the key. With a quiet click, the lock opened. As the door slowly swung inward, a breath of cool air carried the scent of old wood and the faintest trace of vanilla. I froze. She had once laughed and said that every place we loved would remember us, even after we were gone.
Part 4. I stood in the doorway for several long seconds, unable to move. The boathouse was wrapped in silence, yet it didn't feel abandoned. Dust floated through thin beams of afternoon light that slipped between the old wooden boards. A rowboat rested against the far wall, exactly where we had left it years ago. The fishing poles were gone, but everything else seemed frozen in time. The scent of vanilla lingered so faintly that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then I remembered. She used to keep a tiny bottle of vanilla perfume in her backpack. She said every memory deserved its own smell because people forgot words much faster than they forgot a familiar scent. I smiled. She had been right about almost everything. My eyes wandered across the room until they settled on a small wooden shelf. It leaned slightly to one side, but it was still standing. On top rested a rusted lantern, a chipped blue mug, and a smooth white stone with a tiny heart painted on it. Emily had painted that heart during one rainy afternoon when we were trapped inside the boathouse waiting for the storm to pass. She laughed when I asked why. "Because one day we'll forget who left what here," she had answered. "This way we'll know that love existed in this little room, even if no one else believes it." I picked up the stone. The red paint had faded, but the heart was still there. So was everything we had never found the courage to say. Behind the shelf stood an old wooden chest, no larger than a suitcase. The lock had rusted away years ago. Inside lay dozens of little reminders of two teenagers who believed life would always wait for them. A concert ticket, a deck of playing cards with missing queens, a tiny flashlight that no longer worked, a notebook wrapped in a blue ribbon. My breath caught. I recognized it instantly. It was hers. Emily carried that notebook everywhere. Whenever an idea crossed her mind, she wrote it down before it disappeared. She filled pages with dreams, favorite songs, places she wanted to visit, and conversations she never wanted to forget. I opened the cover carefully. The first page wasn't filled with notes. It was a list. Summer goals. Watch the sunrise together. Learn to dance without stepping on each other's feet. Take the canoe across the lake at midnight. Visit New York before turning 25. Never let life make strangers of us. I read the final line 3 times. Never let life make strangers of us. We had failed. Not because we stopped caring, because we believed there would always be another chance, another summer, another phone call, another visit home. The pages that followed were filled with ordinary moments. Today, Ethan tried to skip stones and somehow hit himself in the leg. Today, we got caught in the rain and laughed all the way home. Today, we promised we'd come back here every autumn, no matter where life took us. The memories became harder to read, not because the ink had faded, because every page reminded me of someone I had slowly lost while convincing myself I was building a better future. Near the middle of the notebook, an envelope slipped onto the floor. Unlike the others, it wasn't addressed to me. Across the front, she had written only one sentence. Open this only if we forget how we found each other. My hands began to shake. I already knew the answer. We had forgotten. Very slowly, I unfolded the letter. The first line stole the air from my lungs. If you're reading this alone, then life turned out very differently than we imagined. I read the first sentence again. If you're reading this alone, then life turned out very differently than we imagined. The words seemed heavier than the paper that carried them. For years, I had convinced myself that the past belonged where I had left it. I believed memories became lighter if you ignored them long enough. Instead, they had only waited for me, quietly gathering weight until I was finally strong enough to carry them. I continued reading. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you're opening this beside me while we laugh about how dramatic I always was. But if I'm right, then I need you to know something before you blame yourself for everything that happened. Please don't. Life has a way of pulling people apart without asking whether they're ready. Sometimes we mistake distance for choice. Sometimes we mistake silence for the truth. And sometimes the people who love each other the most are simply too young to understand that love also needs courage. I lowered the letter and closed my eyes. She had always understood feelings better than I did. While I searched for answers, she searched for meaning. While I planned 5 years ahead, she treasured ordinary afternoons that disappeared before either of us noticed. I kept reading. Do you remember the evening we counted shooting stars on the dock? You wished for a life somewhere far away? I wished that wherever you went, you'd never lose the part of yourself that smiled here. I never told you my wish because everyone says they won't come true if you speak them aloud. Maybe that's why I'm writing it now. The memory returned with perfect clarity. The lake had been perfectly still. The sky looked endless. Emily had rested her head against my shoulder, and neither of us spoke for almost an hour. Back then, silence had never felt empty. It had felt complete. Another page waited beneath the first. I turned it over carefully. If you've forgotten my voice, read this slowly. Imagine me laughing after every second sentence. Imagine me rolling my eyes whenever you become too serious. Imagine me telling you that your hair still looks impossible on windy days. Some things never change. A quiet laugh escaped before I could stop it. She was right. Even now, after all these years, the wind outside had left my hair pointing in every direction. For the first time since returning home, I felt as though she were sitting beside me, not as a ghost, not as a dream, as a memory so vivid that the years between us disappeared. A folded map slipped from the notebook. Across it, she had drawn a circle around a place on the northern edge of the lake. Beside it, she had written one date, October 14th. No year, only the date. I frowned. October 14th. Why did it matter? I searched my memory. My birthday was in May. Hers was in February. Our graduation had been in June. Nothing important had happened in October. Or so I thought. Then another memory surfaced. October 14th was the day we first met. Not at school, not at a football game, at the Harvest Festival. She had spilled hot chocolate across my jacket and apologized at least 20 times before laughing so hard that I started laughing too. She insisted on buying me another drink even though I didn't want one. We ended up walking through the festival until every light had gone out. I looked back at the map. The circle wasn't around the boathouse. It marked the old hill overlooking the lake, the place where we watched the sunrise every autumn. Something else rested inside the notebook, a small pressed maple leaf. Its bright red color had faded to deep amber. Written across it in careful handwriting were 4 simple words. Meet me one last time. My heart began to pound. I checked the date on my phone. October 13th. Tomorrow would be October 14th. Exactly 15 years after the day we first met. For a long moment I stood completely still, staring first at the leaf, then at the map. Finally, I folded everything exactly as I'd found it and slipped the notebook into my backpack. Outside, the rain had stopped. A narrow band of golden light broke through the clouds, stretching across the quiet surface of the lake. For the first time since coming home, I knew where I needed to be the following morning. I just didn't know who or what would be waiting for me there. I folded the final letter with more care than I had ever given anything in my life. For years I had believed I came back to this town to say goodbye. Instead, I'd come back to remember who I was before ambition, deadlines, and distance convinced me to become someone else. The morning sun climbed higher, spilling warm light across the lake. The water reflected the colors of autumn exactly as it had the day we first sat here together, believing the future would always make room for us. Emily had been right. Love wasn't measured by how long 2 people stayed together. It was measured by how deeply they changed one another. She had changed me in ways I hadn't understood until now. I slipped every letter back into the box, placing the Polaroid on top. This time I didn't feel like I was burying the past. I was putting it where it belonged, no longer hidden from my heart, but no longer controlling it either. Before closing the lid, I smiled and whispered the words I should have said years ago. Thank you. The wind stirred the maple branches overhead, sending a handful of golden leaves drifting gently to the ground. One landed beside my feet. I picked it up and tucked it inside my wallet. Not as something to hold me back, as a reminder to keep moving forward. When I returned to the farmhouse, the realtor's business card was still waiting on the kitchen table. I looked around the quiet house one last time. Then I picked up my phone and made a different call. Emma answered almost immediately. I think we should keep the house, I said. There was a long silence before she laughed softly. I was hoping you'd say that. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like somewhere I had to chase. It felt like something I could finally build. Some stories end with a goodbye. Ours ended with gratitude. Because first love doesn't always become the love that lasts forever. Sometimes it becomes the love that quietly teaches you how to live the rest of your life.